for the fabulous Greg Lawton. So hands together for that. Thank you so, so much for joining us all the way from Manchester, Greg. So at last, we've got a speaker from the UK. It's brilliant, although you do spend, of course, a little bit of time every so often in Switzerland. But Greg, do you want to just start off by giving yourself a proper introduction so everybody knows who you are, and so therefore probably what you're going to talk about?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. So, hi everyone, Greg Lawton. I'm one of the two co-founders and the CEO of a company called Nodes and Links. We are a AI and cloud technology software company based in the UK, but have offices all around Europe and selling in most of the Western markets now. And what we specialize in is schedule analytics on capital and infrastructure projects. So this is going down. Deborah, you said something that I wrote down, and I think I'm going to start using that in some of the sales collateral. You said that it's about democratizing access to understanding. That's fundamentally what we're doing. It's zero code. It's allowing anybody to understand the schedule and what it means. So taking it from this silo in one tiny area of the project and spreading it out, but also enabling the specialists to spend less of their time focusing on what I call low value, low impact activities, and spending a lot more of their time using their creativity and experience to find those hidden opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do.
Great, thanks for that, Greg. We will send the invoice in the post with regards to the wordage that Deborah provided there. So brilliant, thank you so much, Greg. And again, massive congratulations with regards to all the success that you guys are having in Nodes and Links at the moment. It's a brilliant, brilliant story that you guys are living at the moment. So big question number one, how do you believe that digital innovation is revolutionizing risk management?
We could write a book on that, and I think Gregory has. I tried to compile a very succinct answer, and I kind of bucket it under two areas. One is changing roles, and the other is changing economics. So regarding changing roles, what I see specifically in the project space, so I can't comment about mining or others, but in the project space, I'm seeing new specializations emerge. So people who are much more focused on data analysis and much more focused on understanding data than previously had been the case. What it really is a segmentation of roles. So you would have, for example, a project manager responsible for not just risk, but also schedule, cost planning, and those are now starting to be more segmented. There's also a segmentation between people and machines. So there are certain elements that machines are fantastic at, such as processing data very, very quickly, doing things repetitively in a very efficient and accurate way, etc. But there are a lot of things that people are incredible at that machines can't touch. So things like empathy, things like dealing with ambiguity, things like actually understanding the context of the world, things like having vision about what they would like to achieve, etc. And when you're looking at the workflows and the processes, you can start to kind of almost bucket with a green and blue, where machines would be doing it and where people are doing it. And you see this very nice kind of handover of the baton. And actually this is now a prediction of mine, the last one in this is, I predict that the wages of risk managers are going to increase dramatically at the top end in the next 10 years, because in other professions where there's been a digital revolution, fundamentally an automation and an augmentation revolution, the top end wages have skyrocketed because the people running those are spending less time on the low valuable things and more time fundamentally delivering the business model. And the business model is what creates the money.
So that is great news, folks. We're all going to get paid more. Mm-hmm. But only if we make that change, I guess, in terms of getting the machines to do the grunt work, etc., and welcoming everybody else into the webinar. That's more than.
Sorry, 1 second.
So just to fill whilst Greg is dealing with, getting a cup of tea. That is fantastic. I'm loving that. I'm guessing that was
the benefits of traveling and spending 2 days at your parents' house.
Excellent. So that was delivered by a human being rather than a computer, I'm assuming.
That was delivered by the wonderful Mrs. Lawton.
Excellent. And it was delivered with that intrinsic knowledge of having empathy for you and knowing that you might need a cuppa. Is that right?
Exactly.
Excellent. I'm loving how we're managing to link all of this in. So with all of this then, Greg, so we're seeing quite a dramatic change, I guess, in terms of the skill sets, I suppose, that a risk manager needs. So are you predicting that as risk managers, we all need to be comfortable with what all the tools and techniques that can be offered in the digital space? Or do you think it's something where we can reach out to, I don't know, the likes of yourself and say, hey, can you fill that niche for me?
I think this is what's happening here is actually nothing new. It's what's happened in a lot of instances in every profession since Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations back in 1776. It's division of labor. The suddenly asking risk managers or project managers or schedulers to understand coding or to understand complex algorithms or cloud computing, there's no need to merge those roles. It's almost going backwards in time. If anything, the more forwards we go, the more segmented and specialized people become. I almost see it as risk managers need to do what they've always needed to do, which is to deeply understand the philosophy of risk and the business model of risk and the techniques associated with managing it. What will change is the how all of that is executed. So, for example, do we spend less time putting together long risk registers or less time trying to figure out how to run a scenario analysis as opposed to clicking a button and having it delivered to us for us to ingest and interpret? That will absolutely change. I would personally strongly push back on anything that changes the purpose of the role from what it is. The role is to manage risk. That is the role. And if it suddenly becomes the role is to develop code, you're not doing the job. That's a very harsh point for me. Like internally, it's almost like, I'm running now, getting to quite a large team. It's larger than I've ever run in my life. And it's like, if a salesperson is focusing on anything else than serving customers, if they're focusing on developing product, then there's a problem. There's a problem of connection internally. Like people developing product should be focusing on product, and people, you need that separation.
Cool. So we need that separation that's going on. And I guess, it's the same as we've always had, is that if as a risk manager, you suddenly realize all you're doing is writing stuff into a risk register that nobody ever bothers to look at. Actually, that's quite soul destroying and there's not a huge amount of purpose in it anyway.
Well, I gave a speech recently at the Project Controls Expo, the virtual one. And I actually put out for the first time the kind of core thesis of myself and Christos when we started Milton Links 3 years ago. And it was just 3 fundamental things that we believed about the world. And, 3 years later and, good couple of 8 figures later, it's doing all right for us. And one of those fundamental beliefs is, what is the business model of projects? And people think the business model of projects is to build things. And that's the equivalent of saying business model of McDonald's is to sell burgers. It actually isn't. The business model of McDonald's is to own real estate and to have burgers produce the cash flow to purchase real estate. The business model of projects is for delivery to create free cash flows, and then for risk management to produce profit. That's the business model of projects. And when I see in projects people just going through the motions in risk, and it's not just risk, it's commercial and schedule, it's basically the PMOs. When I see people going through the motions, I look and go, that is a system where it's lost its way. But when you look at the great projects, the ones where risk managers are saying things like, well, I'm actually holding the schedule risk contingency pot in escrow at a corporate level, and we're managing that as a portfolio across the 170 projects we have. And in the meantime, we've figured out how to invest that money and do all of this whilst keeping. I'm like, you're going to make a lot of money this year. Like, those are the people that will be earning those mega bucks.
So with that, Greg, so you're beginning to tickle your, I guess your normal area of play in terms of what Nodes and Links does. I wonder, could you take us a bit more through, your work with, say, like scheduling of an infrastructure project? Do you want to describe that in a bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. So what the big problem was that we identified is fundamentally that understanding the schedule on one of these billion-dollar projects is for all intents and purposes impossible. You can have, as Gregory was kind of going on, you can have the definition of complex nodes and links. So a billion-dollar project can range from anything from 10,000 separate line items at a certain level of detail, with about 15,000 interconnectivities. And that's just activities. We're not talking supply chain or risk or assets or anything like that, all the way up to 100,000. So these things are practically impossible to manage. And there was two problems that came from that. One is, because they were so complex, it became the bastion of a small group of people to try and understand, and they morphed into just trying to keep the thing not broken. And the second is, nobody knew about it. So it was almost, that's for them, we'll just get on with what we're doing. And Deborah said it perfectly, and again, I'll steal it. What digital revolution is allowing us to do is to say, let's not have that complexity. Let's do two things. Let's democratize it so people can understand it and make it simple. If we're relying on people to understand complex things, then we failed in our job of trying to empower them. And then the second is, let's use machines to do all of the, let's just keep this thing not broken, so that we can actually focus on things like running scenario analysis to identify acceleration opportunities, because an acceleration of a day on some projects is worth, the last project I was looking at yesterday is 1.4 million in profit. So let's just find 1 day of acceleration, that's 1.4 million of free cash flow. There you go. Risk manager, you've just paid your wage for the next 10 years. Done.
Depending obviously on what that cap is in terms of what we're going to get paid.
This might be a signal for people to start negotiating more outcome-based wages.
So with that, I love the way that you've connected together the simplicity, but also saying, when we're talking about making risk management simple, we're not talking about dumbing it down. We're talking about making it accessible to everybody.
It's simple, not simplistic. And this is actually it was actually one of the hardest things for me to learn. And I'm not talking about life lessons. I'm literally talking about physics. Like, one of the hardest things for me to learn was the difference between a simple system and a complex system. And put very simply, a complex system has emergent behavior. So you cannot always predict how the thing will actually behave given certain inputs, but you can have a very strong sense of what the outcomes might be. So for example, and based on that, you cannot control a complex system using simple bats. So you can't suddenly say, every company in the UK needs to hire 1,000 apprentices now. It won't happen. But what you can do is control a system with a more nuanced thing. So you can say, for every apprentice that you hire, we'll give you a tax rebate. Figure it out yourself. And it's the same on these kind of things. So it's saying, well, if I want to control the schedule of the project, and I fundamentally cannot control the actions of every person, what I need is some kind of mechanism of having people making informed choices when they're actioning things. So it's more of it's known as a complex contagion. So like, you need that, rather than, if people don't hit schedule, I'll just I'll come down like a bat and hit them. Yeah, it doesn't work. It's you need a different medicine for a different disease.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, this is something here which goes back to some of what both Gregory and Prabha were saying, which is when you're bringing together, say, different data sets, different knowledge, different approaches, you're bringing together different mindsets as well. And I think from my experience, that's where, especially when we're dealing with complexity and nudging people rather than hitting them with bats, except it takes, you can't do that with a stereotypical engineering approach. You need to take a step back and perhaps come at it from a more social science approach, or come at this particular array of risk in a different way.
This is to me is where the intelligence of risk managers come in. So I'll give you an example that isn't quite risk management, but is a good example of kind of these different mechanisms. So the spreading of AIDS in Africa. The spreading of AIDS in Africa is a simple contagion. It's a simple action that is motivated within humans, which is relatively efficient at passing spreading. Another one would be COVID, coughing on people. It's a pretty simple action that can pass. But because it's a network-based disease, because you pass it, you spread it along the nodes and the links, you need a network-based cure. So in AIDS, the network-based cure is education, it's condoms, it's preventative drugs taken at certain points in time when there's a stigma about taking drugs, etc. So curing that is much harder than transmitting it. And the same also with, you could say with COVID, is you had to just brute force isolate people and find them if they didn't wear masks to try and stop this simple contagion spreading. And if you take a business analogy, you could look at simple things like delay propagating within projects, or you could talk about like a corruptive culture spreading within a business, or you could talk about negative network effects coming about from a bad PR incident in a social media net. Like that, these are all things that risk managers will cover, but knowledge that the cure is different from historic cures, that is something that's brand new.
Brilliant.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. And I'm seeing there's all kinds of messages going on. Some of them are private coming into me going, Sarah, just keep Greg talking because this is just genius type thing. But unfortunately, we are getting towards the end of your time. So I have two final questions for you. Firstly, if people want to hear more about nodes and links, where can they go to? But the second question is, given this, rapid and really exciting world of technological innovation, as somebody who is a risk manager or certainly deals in that world, is there something that hasn't been invented yet that you think would be truly awesome? Now, I know that I might be asking you to give us insight to your next company, but so think sci-fi. Is there anything that you would like to see invented, or something that's not quite working yet? What do you reckon?
Oh wow, we could have a book, write a book about this. I was on the phone with a couple of friends over the weekend about companies I need them to start. I'll tell you my vision right now. I can just tell you my vision right now. The purpose of nodes and links, well, it's not the purpose, but the how, as in our interpretation, is to build machine co-pilots. So machines that work on a role by role basis. So for example, you will have a risk manager AI that covers the entire role, and he's basically an assistant. So you would go, I'm really concerned about this area. I'd like to understand what's the exposure. And rather than you going off and doing a 3-week project to kind of gather up, it just literally goes, yes, Sarah, I've done it for you. Here's the exposure. I found 3 big things that I think you should look at. Would you like me to present them to you? Yes, I would. Like, that's where I'd like to get to. One of our early investors was actually the inventor of Alexa because of that. So I was like, I want it to be a living thing. Whether or not we'll get there, we'll see. We shall see.
I think, Greg, we probably need to share one another's libraries, because I've certainly in my imagination got that little co-pilot that sits on my wrist, or is maybe a chip that's embedded somewhere. Brilliant. I mean, Greg, as always, we could spend a long time discussing all of this. And yeah, please, I do point you in the direction of the Q&A and the chat. So everybody, please put your hands together, not only for the cup of tea that was delivered by Greg's mum, but also Greg Lawton himself. So round of applause. Thank you very, very much, Greg.